It is wonderful to be here, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to be in Australia's most sophisticated city. Can I thank family and friends and former parliamentary colleagues. Mitch Farfield's here, Julia McGorran, and of course David Kemp. It's terrific to see you all. None of us have changed. Can I thank Georgina Downer and Georgina, everyone here at the Menzies Institute. You've been so generous in looking after me and hosting me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you. It's been wonderful. And finally, to Peter, we shared a flat in Canberra for many years, Peter and I. And the rumour going around was that he finally left Parliament to get away from me. And so when I got back from overseas, and I said, I got hold of Peter, and he said, Peter, I need a little bit of help with just I could just sense a sigh on the end of the telephone. Yes, look, I need some help with this book I'm writing. And Peter, again, was enormous support, yet again. And without his support, it would have been so much harder to launch these books, to get going, to get a publisher. And Peter, again, I owe you. And thank you, mate, for all you've done. Thank you. At the heart of this book, as Peter mentioned, is a story about how an Australian bookkeeper turned coast watcher, Reg Evans, found and rescued an American naval officer, Lieutenant John F. Kennedy. But it's more than that. It's about how Australia discovered America, and about how America discovered Australia, and how that has mattered, and how that has mattered to us all ever since. On a moonless and foggy night on the 2nd of August 1943, it's 80 years ago, Lieutenant John F. Kennedy was on patrol in enemy waters in the Solomon Islands when a torpedo boat he commanded, PT-109, was rammed by a Japanese destroyer and cut in two. The crash killed 2 of Kennedy's crew instantly and left the other 10 precariously clinging to wreckage in the water within sight of Japanese encampments. After drifting for some 15 hours in the water, and with the wreckage beginning to sink, young Jack Kennedy led the survivors to a small island, saving a badly burned crewman by biting on the strap of his life jacket and towing him to safety. Thank God he was a good swimmer. Kennedy's wartime heroism first made his public name, and after the war paved his way into politics. As many people here know, first the House of Representatives, then the Senate, Peter, and ultimately, of course, the presidency. But missing, presumed dead, behind enemy lines, with no food or water and with several injured, Kennedy and his men are unlikely to have survived to return home, if not for the fortunate presence of Australian Coast Watcher Lieutenant Reg Evans, who witnessed the aftermath of the collision from his nearby jungle hideaway. What was Reg Evans doing behind enemy lines in the Solomon Islands, and who were the Coast Watchers? Georgina and I were discussing this earlier today. The Coast Watchers were essentially intelligence officers observing and reporting on enemy activity. As Reg Evans himself said, a Coast Watcher's work is to sit in hiding like a spider right in the web of the enemy, unseen and unheard. We became the eyes and the ears of the Pacific. But, ladies and gentlemen, it was very, very dangerous work. And frankly, if you were caught, you'd be killed, but you would be tortured first. And when people were all volunteers who were Coast Watchers, when they were being recruited, they were told, I can offer you only one thing with certainty, the certainty of peril. It was dangerous work behind enemy lines. Evans, originally from Sydney, but who had before the war worked in the Pacific Islands as a bookkeeper, quickly alerted the Solomon Islander scouts working with him, and with courage and, frankly, some luck. The scouts managed to find the PT-109 castaways 3 days later. Kennedy was then taken by the scouts to see Evans, hidden under palm fronds in the canoe, so the Japanese spotters wouldn't see him, or indeed a white person, on the water. Just as the canoe approached the beach, Kennedy jumped out into the surf and, seeing Reg Evans waiting for him on the shore, said with much relief, "Man," no doubt in a Boston accent, "Man, am I glad to see you." Evans sized up this skinny, bedraggled, sunburned, unshaven and exhausted young American, shook his hand and said, "And I'm bloody glad to see you too, mate." They spent the next 2 hours in Evans' secret camp drinking tea and planning the rescue of Kennedy's crew. The rest, as they say, is history. And for Kennedy and his surviving men, it had a happy ending. Evans coordinating with the US Navy the pickup of the crew of the PT-109 on the following night. Kennedy always remembered with great fondness and with gratitude his rescuers and hoped one day to meet them all again. The problem was that Kennedy misremembered Evans' name, and so the Coast Watcher was misnamed, and even worse, misidentified as a New Zealander. Adding insult to injury there. Nevertheless, in all the post-war retellings of the rescue, Evans himself was too modest to correct the record. But of course, as Kennedy was running for president in 1960, everyone wanted to know who was the bloke that rescued Kennedy. And eventually, Evans outed himself publicly as the man responsible. And as Georgina mentioned before, by the time Menzies first met with the new president on the 24th of February 1961, Evans had been properly identified, prompting President Kennedy to say, yes, Australia was responsible in a way for his administration. As they'd never met before, wasn't that a great icebreaker? And they always got along. Those two. Later that year, Evans came to the United States as a bit of a celebrity. Imagine being a Sydney bookkeeper. All of a sudden he's a celebrity in the United States. And he appeared on nationally syndicated television. You can see it on YouTube, actually. It's there. And on the 1st of May, he met with President Kennedy in the Oval Office for about 30 minutes. Evans recorded later on that he felt at home with President Kennedy from the first moment, and paying President Kennedy the ultimate Aussie compliment, wrote, "We chatted on like two old cobbers." In the following year, in 1962, one of the Solomon Islander scouts, Benjamin Kevu, also visited the United States and had a chance to meet President Kennedy. Kevu's visit took place during the America's Cup yacht race, where Australia was challenging for the first time with Sir Frank Packer's yacht Gretel. Some may remember that. Challenged in 1962, September 1962, when Gretel, representing the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, we lost. But President Kennedy took time out from the brewing Cuban Missile Crisis to watch several of the races, and at the official dinner spoke warmly about our friends from Australia, this extraordinary group of men and women numbering some 10 million, who are bound to an ocean, to the United States, concluding that so beyond this race, beyond the result, rests this happy relationship between two great peoples. In fact, he was planning to visit Australia initially in late 1963 and then in early 1964. The plans got first delayed, and then, of course, his tragic death ended the possibility. And I remember looking at the records in the archives in Canberra of President Kennedy's intended visit. And Peter, you'd understand all this. There was a bloke in the Department of the Prime Minister, as it then was, who wrote a message to John Bunting, who was then the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister. And he said to John Bunting, I understand, John, that President Kennedy is scheduled to visit in March, April of 1964, but it can't happen because my office is too busy and I run these visits. And he said he can't visit because the Prime Minister of Japan is coming, the Queen Mother, and the Maharaja of Mysore. And so he said we'd have to put off his visit. And there was even speculation that President Kennedy would open Lake Burley Griffin in Canberra. Whether he'd do it from PT 109, a replica or not, I don't know. But there's no doubt that if President Kennedy had come, it would have been a cross between a royal visit and Beatlemania. You can imagine the excitement. As a very small child, I remember President Johnson coming, but as a small kid, and the excitement of that with sitting on my father's shoulders in, 1966 or something. It's a hell of a long time ago. But the excitement would have been palpable. Though Kennedy had good reason to be glad to see Evans that August afternoon in 1943 on a beach in the Solomon Islands, Evans too, in a way, could have been speaking for 7 million Australians when he said with relief, "I'm bloody glad to see you." Evans knew by then that his homeland had been saved from any threat of Japanese invasion by the fellow countrymen of the skinny, sunburned and unshaven young officer whose hand he now grasped. Bedraggled perhaps, but also confident, energetic and optimistic. Jack Kennedy was America, a great and dynamic new power finally arisen from slumber and about, of course, to assume great global responsibilities. The handshake between Jack Kennedy and Reg Evans, replicated on countless occasions during the war by the two peoples, in my mind's eye, very much stands as the avatar of the fateful encounter between America and Australia in the beginning of Trans-Pacific friendship. The relationship was important then and remains so to this very day, with attempts by potential adversaries to isolate Australia from the United States, with the Pacific Islands again a target. History is coming full circle and the friendship remains as vital as ever.